Slowly
There you go.
learn how to do these things. Okay.
I got you. You are
All
recording.
right. So now that everyone knows we're recording this session, it's being recorded for posterity and for future use and reference and training. So you should be aware that if you participate or ask a question, you your name, etc., may become known. So we should begin by recognizing that we're dealing with housing issues, living accommodations, rights, etc. And we should understand that land, which is what we're all talking about in a very abstract way, is that the lands upon which the university sits and on which we operate and work every day at one time were peopled by different nations and different peoples. So the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Leyawanwak, and I'm sure I'm not doing this perfectly, and the Attawandaron peoples were all traditional lands that we share. So we want to acknowledge that presence and that sharing. And we can go through. So the purpose of these sessions is to, one, facilitate law student participation and demonstration and gaining experience in order to become better lawyers. So you're going to help lawyers become better people and better representatives. So with me today is Shanpreet Shokar. Shanpreet is a law student here at Western. He has completed his first year of studies, which covers the basic areas. My name is Ian Dancer, and I'm a lawyer here at the CLS, or Community Legal Services. And there are a bunch of us, both students and other lawyers, which are called Review Council, as part of this meeting. So we want to get to what you're here for and what you really want to know. So we'll start with Shanpreet. Shanpreet is going to give a brief introduction, 10 minutes or less, on the tenant rights for landlord maintenance obligations. So maintenance and repair, as Shanpreet will tell you, is one of the obligations that landlords have. And it's often a most important issue for people, whether it be broken windows, broken door locks, rodents, bed bugs, water damage, water infiltration, mold. All those sorts of things are critical. So Shanpreet, you have the screen. It's all yours for 10 minutes or less.
Thanks, Ian, for handing off the floor. Now I guess I'm kind of on a stopwatch. Hi, everyone. So as Ian said, we're going to be discussing tenant rights in the context of landlord maintenance obligations. To start off, I just wanted to set out the law. So the Residential Tenancies Act, or in other words, the RTA, sets out the obligations landlords and tenants have for the maintenance and repair of a rental property. And these obligations apply to all rental agreements. Even if the rental agreement is not in writing, the terms in the rental agreement conflict with the RTA, or the rental unit was not in good condition and the tenant agreed to rent it either way. Now, what is maintenance? It's a very broad term and it's very general. So it can be construed to mean very many different things, as my legal friends might know. So what does maintenance mean? Well, it could mean many things, like I said. One thing it could mean is the repair of rental property. A landlord must keep a rental property in a good state of repair. All things that the landlord provides to the tenant must be kept in working order. And this can include electrical, plumbing, or heating systems, appliances, carpets in the unit, common areas like walls, roofs, ceilings, windows, doors, lighting, garages. Anything like that can be construed to mean need repair. If something, however, no longer works due to normal wear and tear, or because it breaks or wears out, the landlord must repair it so that it works properly, or replace it. However, when something is replaced, the landlord doesn't have to supply a newer, better model. So for example, if a stove supplied by the landlord cannot be fixed and it must be replaced, it doesn't have to be replaced with a newer model with more features. And the landlord can also replace it with a used stove, as long as that used stove works properly and all of its functions are intact. Maintenance also entails that the landlord must maintain the rental property, which essentially means that the landlord must keep the rental property clean. This includes the lobby, halls, elevator, laundry room, pool, and parking lot or garage, if applicable. A landlord must also take steps to control pests such as cockroaches and mice. Also, maintenance also means that the landlord must meet property standards. And this includes standards such that comply with health, safety, housing, and maintenance standards. And these standards are set out in the municipal bylaws of your city or provincial maintenance standards. So this is an important distinction because for municipal bylaws, many communities in Ontario have bylaws that set minimum standards for upkeep and maintenance of a rental property. A landlord must maintain a rental property to these minimum standards. And your local municipal government is responsible for enforcing these bylaws. However, some communities don't have municipal bylaws. And in those areas, the landlord must follow the provincial maintenance standards set out in the Residential Tenancies Act regulations. The municipality is responsible for enforcing the provincial maintenance standards. The next maintenance standard that the landlord must comply with is follow fire safety laws, which is kind of obvious, but the landlord must follow all fire safety laws that are applicable. And these are available from your local fire department, or it's also available from the Office of the Ontario Fire Marshal. This is a bit of a more important one. The landlord cannot interfere with vital services. Now, what exactly is vital? It's a very broad and encompassing term. So vital services are hot or cold water, fuel, electricity, gas, and during certain months of the year, heat. If a landlord provides heat, it must be kept at a minimum temperature of 20 degrees Celsius from September 1st to June 15th. However, some municipal standards may be higher. If a landlord provides any vital service to a tenant, the landlord cannot withhold a reasonable supply of it. This rule applies even if the tenant's rent is overdue or the tenant has damaged the property. If a rental property has a tenant, if a rental agreement says the tenant must arrange for one or more of these services, for example, the tenant pays for the hydro directly by themselves, the landlord can't deliberately interfere with these services. Finally, the landlord must give notice to enter the legal unit. A landlord may enter a rental unit to inspect for maintenance problems, make repairs, do work, or replace something. This applies to maintenance because obviously the landlord can't just come and go when they want to. The landlord must give the tenant written notice at least 24 hours before the landlord plans to enter. And the written notice must include 3 elements: the reason why the landlord wants to enter, the date the landlord will enter, and a specific time entry between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. This is important because the landlord just can't come in the middle of the night to fix something when it's convenient for them to do so. So what can tenants do when there's a problem? Well, they have many options. And the first one is most often inform the landlord. If a tenant has a maintenance problem, the first thing they should do is ask the landlord in writing to fix the problem. Now that's an important distinction because in writing, make sure that you have a history of the facts and that you ask them in writing, whereas orally, you might not have a record of what happened. The tenant can write the landlord a letter or complete a maintenance or work order request form. The tenant should keep a copy of this written request. Now, in many cases, the landlord does not fix the problem. So if after being informed about the problem, the landlord does not fix it within a reasonable time, the tenant can report the problem to the local government or file an application with the LTP or do both of these things. The tenant can contact their local municipal government and ask to have the property standards bylaw enforced, or if there's no property standards bylaws, then have the provincial maintenance standards enforced. So in this case, the local municipality might inspect the property for any bylaw violations, issue a notice of violation, or a municipal work order that requires the landlord to make repairs by the deadline. If the landlord does not do these repairs, the local municipal government can take the landlord to court for not following the bylaw work and add the cost to the landlord's property taxes. I realized after this presentation that some of you may be interested in retaining community legal services. Currently, CLS is not fully operational, but CLS does do housing intakes. However, we are only offering summary advice for housing intakes at this moment. That concludes my presentation. Thank you. And now we'll shift over to Ian for questions.
You gotta, and yeah, hello everyone again. Fantastic that you're here. We did invite people to provide questions. I put the only question we received in advance, and it's on the chat now. I put it there so people can have it. So my landlord wants to raise rent by 60%. Mid-year with only verbal notice and implied threat of moving into unit if I don't agree to the increase. Landlord lives on top level of duplex with his wife. I live on the main floor. I do not have a lease, have been living here for 30 years. I want to stay here, but worry about the threat and don't know my rights given I have no written lease. All right, so this is not an uncommon problem. So first of all, whatever we provide today is legal information, not legal representation. So we're not providing specific advice to anyone, but general legal information that applies to their situation. And in that means that you have to take that information, do your own analysis and apply it to the situation as best you see, or alternatively come in to see us at CLS and we can do a more formal intake. So rent is restricted in Ontario. Landlords are allowed to increase it by a set percentage every year, once a year. It was frozen at 0% for 2 years in the past during the pandemic. This year, currently it's 1.3%. So 60% is not a legal increase with one little comment. First of all, you can do it once a year. Secondly, it has to be with notice, written notice. There's a specific notice. If you want the rent to increase more than the 1.3%, the landlord needs to seek approval from the LTB through an application. Otherwise, it's an illegal rent. Changes to the act have suggested that if a tenant begins to pay the illegal rent and does so for a year, then they are precluded from complaining about it. So do it early. So 60% seems crazy. And I suspect if you've been there for 30 years, guessing, that your rent is quite low. And that you have had the benefit of the statutory protections for that period of time. So the threat of moving in is really meant to get you out so that the landlord can either rent to someone else and get that 60%, catch up to what current market values are, or alternatively get you to pay it. That's really what's going on. In terms of a lease, you always have a lease, whether it's written or not. And there is a standard lease in place now in the province as of April 1st, 2018. Obviously, you wouldn't have that, but your lease is been there. Sorry, I mean, I'm not trying to provide specific advice, but you have a lease. It's just an oral lease, and it has certain terms which are implied by law, and that's about as much information as I can give in those circumstances. So there's no need to, whether you leave or not is really up to you and your business decision, but that's about all I can say about answering that question, because it gets difficult without giving specific advice as to what you should do as opposed to information. So the key information there is rent is restricted. It's only 1.3%. It has to be written notice. The threat is important to record if you can, because it makes it very clear what the landlord's motive is. They want to attract the increased rents that are now prevalent throughout London. And if you're at a 30-year lease rate, you're way below fair market value. That's the best I can do with that question in these circumstances. So that was our only question. I know that we have some people who are guests, and I don't want to point them out, but if any of our guests have a question, if they could throw them in the chat, we'd be glad to try to provide you the information that might help answer your question. If you're just here for out of general interest, that's fabulous, and I hope you keep coming back. And that will provide more detail as we move forward. So the presentation is really meant to be a town hall, a brief introduction to a specific topic, and we will be doing these once a week. So next Wednesday and the Wednesday after that. And there'll be a hiatus then until the September school term is up and running, but we'll keep people on notice. So, okay. Oh, so there are some general questions. Can your landlord prevent you from having pets? Generally, no. There are exceptions. So the Act specifically protects the right to have a pet in your home, your tenancy. Whether you can be pre-screened for pets is often the problem. So the landlord might advertise no pets. And if you go, you may be asked if you have a pet. And if you have a pet, then you're in a bit of a dilemma, because if you say you do, you probably won't get accepted. If you say you don't and lie, then when the pet shows up later, that there's nothing the landlord can then do, except if it causes problems throughout the units, or it is causing health problems for other tenants or the landlord. So if somebody's allergic to dander in dogs and you have a dog, there is the possibility the landlord can have the dog evicted, and which usually means you get evicted with it. But those are relatively rare circumstances. So generally, you cannot be prevented from having a pet. When can a landlord enter your apartment? Always with written notice, always 24 hours, unless you consent. If you consent and the landlord says, I'd like to come in and look at your fuse box or change your tap or whatever it is, then that's perfectly legal. But otherwise, as Sean Preet's presentation has shown, there are restricted hours, there has to be written notice, there has to be a legitimate purpose. There would be, of course, emergencies. If you're not home and your place is on fire or a tap is running and there's flooding, there are emergency situations in which a landlord can enter. But generally, it's an estate in law, and it's a modified version of land ownership. So there is privacy and protection. When do you need a written lease? You always need a written lease. You always have a written lease because the standard lease is now mandatory in Ontario. And if you don't get one, you can send the landlord notice until you do. And there's even a provision for saving a month's rent if you don't get it on time. But generally, don't take that too lightly. Always pay your rent on time. What can happen if you end your lease early? Well, if it's on consent, not much. You move out, you go on. If you abandon the premises, however, the landlord is likely to come after you for the rent that's owing or may be owing, and that may be currently in the small claims court, but more likely as we move forward back in the LTB. So pay your rent, and there you go. Should your roommate sign the lease? I'm not sure where that question comes from. Normally, landlords will insist that every tenant of the property sign the lease. That's almost universal. And you can have occupants living with you, but they would not be tenants. So it could be a boyfriend, partner, girlfriend, a guest for a week or two or whatever. Those things are fine. But as to the question, your roommate, should they sign the lease? Yes, the landlord will insist, but also for your protection, so that you're not the only one on the lease and the only one responsible for the legal obligations. So that covers the questions that were posed and presented. It answers them in the sense that it's the legal information surrounding them has now been given to you, and what you do with it is up to you. We're not giving you advice or representation, but you're more than welcome to come in and we can go from there and pick it up. Okay, so I think I've answered all the questions that were posed. I have nothing else to present today unless anyone has a question from the group that's participating, and I'll wait a minute or two to see if there are any questions. And if not, that I think we'll close it up for today.
Trent, do participants have the ability to access the chat here?
I don't know. Oh, yeah, somebody did.
Yes, they do.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
Wanted to double check.
fabulous. We have a question. Fantastic. Thank you. My housemates and I signed a lease, and it says that the total rent at the end of the month that is expected is $2,800. We are able to divide the payments based on our discretion as long as the total is met. However, if one of them abandons us, are we obligated to pay the total still, or will the landlord only have to deal with the one who left? The standard form lease, which I also signed a lease and it says, okay, I'm not sure of the date of your lease. I'm assuming that it's after April of 2018. So the standard lease would be the one that you would have signed or should be. And you can check that quite clearly if it has the government forms, or look up standard lease and you'll see if it's the same. It should be, and it must be, in fact, by law. So if it's not, that's one problem that you can work with. The $2,800 is likely based upon, if it is the standard form, you are joint tenants, because that's the way that the form has been designed. So in the past, landlords have always wanted all of the tenants to sign, and they've wanted them all to be joint tenants. So what that means is that a joint tenant or joint tenants, so let's say there's 3 roommates and you, there's 4 people paying the $2,800. The $2,800 is owed by each of you individually and all of you collectively. So if 3 of you disappeared, the one that's left would be obligated to pay the $2,800 each and every month. If the people who abandon that person, you would then have to go and pursue them for their respective share as your joint tenant. It's not the landlord's responsibility. The landlord will chase the easiest target, which is usually the person with money and who's present. So however you sort it out amongst yourselves is fine. But in total, there has to be $2,800 each and every month in the landlord's bank account, or you haven't paid the rent, and the landlord is then capable of pursuing one or all. And I think that answers the question. Are there any other questions out there? Oh, okay. Thank you. You're welcome. That's why we're here, and this is great that we're anxious to get out there and provide advice, information and help. You see, I even slip on that one. So, and that distinction is important because we don't know all the facts. I haven't seen the lease. I don't know the individuals involved. There's not been conflict checks or retainers. So it's just information at this point. I don't tell you what to do or how to do it. I tell you what the law is, and then you can hopefully apply it and negotiate something with the landlord. Okay, anybody else? So if not, I first want to thank Shanpreet. Shanpreet is leaving Western and is going to that other law school, Osgood. It's not very good school, but there he goes. No, he's moving for family. So this is really important for him to gain some confidence. He did a great job. I really thought that was fabulous. And, he will now gain some confidence when he goes to Toronto and helps people in Toronto. But that's what we're all here to make it better for you. So that's good. So that's all I've got today. Sorry. That's our first one. Very excited about it. Hope we can keep doing it. And if you have any comments or feedback, good or bad, please send it along because we do want to make it better. And we're not YouTubers or influencers or anybody specialized or actors. So we do the best we can.
Ian, do you want to make some comment about the next session? What you're going to do and when next?
Yeah, I can talk about the next sessions in a general way because I know there's an order change because one of the students was tied up. So the next one is going to be, we're going to talk about rent and rent control. That was a bit of a topic today, but we're going to deal with it in more detail. How does the landlord apply for an increase beyond the 1.3%? What do you do when you receive it? Where do I find what the permitted rent increases every year? Those sorts of things, and talk about rent. And then we're also doing sessions on quiet enjoyment. And so it'll be general things, but we'll be here generally to answer any info questions. So if you know other people, friends, roommates, fellow students, whatever, tell them about this and tell them about CLS, and we'll do our best to help them.
And those information links, Trent, are going to be posted on our website, correct? Can you put a link to the website in the chat just so that anybody who is interested can access that?
Sure thing.
Perfect.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. And please do provide your advice and comments so we can make it better. What would you like to hear about? What would you like to know about? What's bothering you in your tenancy situation? Because generally the problems are fairly common and others could benefit from the information.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ian, for that great insight into all of those issues. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to having more sessions coming in the future. I see Trent has just put the link up there now for our website, so that is accessible there for anybody who wants to copy it and join us. Are we next week? Is next week the next one?
Next Wednesday at 12 noon.
So check our website for the details on how to join if you would like to listen to the next one. Thank you very much, and thank you, Sean Preet. Were you going to
So
say something else, Ian?
Yeah, the speaker, Kimberly, is our director now at the clinic. So just so you're aware, so all complaints should be directed to her and all compliments should be directed to Preet and myself. That's all.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who joined us. We really appreciate you coming out, and we hope that you found it useful and that you'll join us or spread the word to others who might be interested to join us at our next session. Thanks very much.